Bar for Bar album reviews. JID, The Forever Story. The Forever Story is the latest album from Atlanta rapper and Dreamville signee JID. And this album has been very, very highly anticipated by many, including myself, pretty much since the Never Story dropped back in, 2016? Now, obviously, we've gotten an album in between, as well as the Revenge of the Dreamers 3 tape and D-Day. So there's been music with JID out. Also, the Spillage Village albums. I can't forget that one. He's been doing music. He's been busy. But the Forever Story has always been, just kind of talked about. It's always been like, oh yeah, I can't wait till this drops, sort of thing. And even JID himself would be on that same page, like, yo, I can't wait till y'all hear it. Now, as time went on, there's been a bunch of leaks and a bunch of, changes, sample clearances, and the album that we may have gotten originally, I think it was originally slated for earlier this year, maybe even before, that may have been kind of, pushed aside because, like I said, leaks. But he went in with all these brand new songs and gave us a pretty solid project. Now, I'm not going to lie and say that I was just pleased all the way through, because when you have an album that's so highly anticipated, and generally, JID's kind of high profile, I would say, compared to a lot of other artists. Dreamville has a following, JID has a following, so it's not like this shouldn't have been a bad album or shouldn't have been a good album. It's still a good album, but I think because my expectations were so high, it kind of made me go into this album critiquing it right away. And it's not necessarily a bad album, like I said. It's just, I feel like it's missing something. For me, when I listen to JID, I want him to do more of the, just rap over more soulful production, more, singing in his voice, because he tends to do well with that. But also, having solid bars. And that's not to say we didn't get solid bars throughout this album. It's definitely there. It's just, I don't know, maybe it's a little more scatterbrained than I would have liked it. It's still, like I said, it's a very solid project all the way through. And in fact, as I go through the track list, as I'm looking at it right now, most of the album's pretty solid. And I can't really think of any particular song that's just straight up bad. And the only one that I was actually extremely disappointed with was the Ari Lennox track, because I don't know, just the way that she sounds on this track just wasn't doing it for me. That's not to say that JID's verse was bad. His last verse on that track was great, but I think that's a trend that happens a lot with his music, or at least in this album. For example, the track that he did with Kenny Mason and Lil Wayne, his first verse was okay. It was fine. But then Lil Wayne came in and just went crazy, and JID basically picked up where he left off and tried to carry that same energy. Did it necessarily match it? I guess. But it still sounded good to me. We also see another time where he gets outshined by his featured artist with the track Stars. Yasin Bey does a great job on that track. And it kind of makes me think, back in the day, we had all these rappers who, whenever someone would be featured on their track, they would try to go even harder. They wouldn't want their featured artist to necessarily outshine them. But I think in this case, it's intentional and kind of on purpose, because it's throughout the album, you hear such heavy Lil Wayne influence. You don't see as much Yasin Bey influence, but it's there. JID wears his influences on his sleeve. It's there. And again, that's not a bad thing. I appreciate that. It's just, it's interesting to think about. The other thing that I wanted to mention, that in discussions with other people that came up, is although he's telling a bit of a story throughout this project, and talking about his family life, his history, stuff like that, it seems like the verses don't necessarily tell that story. It's more in some of the skits and just generally the last verses in most of the songs. For example, Crack Sandwich, which on first listen was one of my favorite songs and still is. looking back, the first two verses don't do too much to really tell you what's going on. I mean, just thinking back on it now, the third verse though is where everything kind of ties in together and makes sense. Now, I'm sure you did that intentionally, but for me, I feel like if you're going to be telling some sort of story or get some sort of point across, you'd want to do it kind of throughout the track rather than just in that verse. But again, I'm just a dude on the internet talking about music. What do I know? Those are just my preferences. I will say though, this album has a lot of good runs on it. The beginning of the album, from Galaxy to Crack Sandwich, solid. Can't Punk Me, I'm not too big on that sort of sound from JID or Earth Gang. Like, that's not really what I listened to them for, but it was okay. Surround Sound was obviously the first single and still one of my favorite songs on the album. But then we have a run from Cody Blue 31 to System M, and that's a great 3-track run. Like, you have Cody Blue 31 where he's essentially, at least thinking back on it now, he's talking about himself. Then you have Brother M, where he's not necessarily talking about, he could be talking about his little brothers, but also just friends, people that he considers brothers, and just, the interactions that they had together. And then System M, same thing, but with sisters or women in his life. And, it's just, I think those 3 tracks do a lot to kind of hold the attention of this album. And I think that's where the majority of the depth and the content is. Obviously, you get it on other tracks too, but that run right there is where you get a lot of it, in my opinion. I already mentioned how I feel about Can't Make You Change. It's fine, I guess, but definitely not my favorite track by far. But Stars, Just in Time, Money, and Better Days, and Lauder 2, like, it's a great way to end out an album. I'm not gonna lie though, but whenever I listen to Just in Time, I'm like, okay, the album's done. Like, that seems like a good way to end out the album. Because Money, it's okay. Like, I understand the purpose of the song. It's talking about money and how it's all around him, but it doesn't do too much to add to the album, at least for me. But then we have Better Days and Lauder 2, which is a follow-up to Lauder off the Never Story, and those are just great tracks. Those are probably two of my favorite tracks, really. They just do a great job of wrapping up the album and tying it back to the Never Story, which, before I forget, I want to mention at least the intro track, Galaxy, just it's pulled directly from the Never Story, like the singing part. So, you have a lot of callbacks, and I'm sure there's more. It's just, I think I only listened to the Never Story a couple of times right before the album came out, so I'm not able to draw all these connections or conclusions, but I'm sure that there's references throughout this album to the Never Story, because right off the jump, we have the album cover, which is basically the Never Story's album cover, but with actual people rather than a drawing. So, it's kind of cool. But overall, I will say this album was pretty solid. I think the reason that for me it won't necessarily be on my albums of the year list is because my expectations were too high. If I had gone in expecting nothing, it's a pretty damn good album. But because I went in expecting more introspection, or more right in your face sort of introspection, and more singing and soul sounding beats, especially based off of Surround Sound being the lead single, if I had gotten more of that, I think I would like it a lot more. But it's still too early to say. The album's only been out for about a week, so I can't form a full opinion on where it stands, but we'll see. We will see. We'll see how much I listen to it going into the second half of the year, and come December, we'll see where it stands. My favorite tracks are the whole run from Surround Sound through System M, and Radar's good. That's the thing. There's so many good songs on it to me, but it's just because they're disjointed, and I feel like he meant to tell a story through it. it just doesn't. Yeah, I don't know. I could also just be missing something entirely. So like I said, I'm gonna keep listening to it. We'll see where it ends out by the end of the year. But let me know in the comments below what you guys thought of this album and what your favorite tracks are. And while you're down there, like and subscribe if you want to see more reviews and content like this. I know it's been a while since I've dropped reviews or anything, but we're getting there. We're working on it. With all that said, thank you for watching, and please stay safe out there.